It's been a heartbreaking couple of days. I am continually discouraged by how the official decision machine finds new ways to not do what is right or needed, or to think that public criticism of the process is a thing to defend against, rather than respond to with clear, humble course corrections. In other words, the Red Bridge think tank is at it again. If the plan is to simply wear down resistance with Orwellian doublethink and endless virtue signaling to the point that we're all howling in frustration and grinding our teeth in befuddlement, it may be working, and they may be mad geniuses. But I don't think so. In advance, therefore, if you already sense a different tone in my voice, I must ask your forbearance and even forgiveness. This post may reveal more of my frustrated humanity than previous attempts. I will seek to address and clarify the following. 1. Who is who? 2. What is what? 3. Why this is the wrong conversation. Who is who? For those keeping score at home, there are now roughly 6 groups involved in the IHOP-KC mess. For clarity's sake, and owing to IHOP-KC's preference for naming groups, I shall adopt the names to which certain groups have previously been assigned, while also adding a couple of my own for shorthand. The 6 groups include 1. IHOP-KC Leadership, RBTT, since the ELT and board is now a revolving door of unnamed people. For the purpose of this note, they are fourth with the Red Bridge think tank. 2. IHOP-KC Loyalists, the Insiders. 3. Friends of Jane Doe, the Advocate Group. 4. Friends of the Truth, the Armchair Investigators. 5. People with Opinions, the Outsiders. 6. People watching in horror, the Appalled, i.e. the wider body of Christ. To be clear, I am part of the official AG, though that group is relatively small. As we have tried to explain at other times, the AG is loath to call themselves the AG because, though clustered and labeled as such by the RBTT, we have no official genesis and no group charter. Rather, the AG represents an organic amalgamation of former leaders who came together accidentally and providentially at different times and from different directions, bound together primarily out of common concern for the alleged victims and common desire to employ a biblical process in confronting the accused. I cannot emphasize enough, it didn't have to be this way. There were 1,000 other gentler paths. But since goals define trajectory and values define protocol, the predefined outcome has clearly been revealed, which is not to shepherd, to give account, or to cleanse, but to minimize exposure, manage information, and somehow, however improbably, leverage a certain measure of incredulity and goodwill among the remaining faithful to win a twisted PR war. The desired outcome, a prayer room that won't stop, regardless of the blood on the battlefield or the casualties of war. I've previously given as much benefit of the doubt as I could manage, but the body count of new deconstructionists that will result from this cannot be dismissed as merely bad management by flawed men who were ill-equipped for a crisis of this magnitude. While I definitely count myself among the most flawed of men who would be similarly ill-equipped to wade through this muck, the fact remains, months later, we're in a different game. To my knowledge, only 4 of the 12 members of the ELT configuration with whom I served remain, and an esteemed, retired military general has taken over, making heartfelt declarations to the dwindling, disheartened staff that any actions that could possibly lead to the prayer room shutting down are inherently demonic. Taken on its own merits, the new IHOP has taken on the tenor of a mafia side project led by backdoor power brokers, a psyops campaign deliberately utilizing misinformation tactics, or a show trial playbook. The rest of the 6 groups identified are mostly self-explanatory. What is what? Part 1. The Document. When the Matthew 18 attempt of an aggrieved husband to directly confront IHOP-KC's visionary, founding leader, Mike Bickle, regarding past clergy sexual abuse of his wife, was thwarted by Mike himself. Credible allegations were then submitted to the ELT so that the biblical process could continue. To organize and facilitate the disclosure of those allegations, a 50-page working document was surrendered privately and in good faith to the executive director, who immediately broke faith by including Mike in a reading of the document, and also apparently distributing portions, or all, or certain confidential elements, to others beyond the ELT, including women whose identities were never disclosed or named in the document itself, but whose stories bore an odd and troubling semblance in certain aspects, as I shall continue to explain. This document contained a detailed list of allegations from 3 Jane Doe storylines, including 2 personal impact statements written by 2 Jane Does, each of whom shared their stories directly. with a third impact statement coming not from the suspected Jane Doe herself, but her husband, whose marriage had been shattered by events he painfully communicated from his own first-hand experience. The document was compiled over an extended period of time to meet the required standard of 1 Timothy 5 verses 19 to 20. To that end, it also included direct and secondary support material intended to communicate the full gravity of the concerns, along with requested next steps and other reference material drawn from similar scenarios involving Bill Hybels, Ravi Zacharias, and others. The intent was to be thorough enough in compiling meaningful evidence that could otherwise take weeks to get off the ground, and helpful enough in providing cautionary tales from other poorly managed situations to provoke a thoughtful internal investigation. Out of 50 pages, roughly 20 contained the direct allegations and impact statements. The rest was support material, screenshots, other case studies, circumstantial and character observations that correlated to the main data, recommended next steps, and more. At the same time, the document was always intended as a working document and an internal document, not a public document. It was to help facilitate an independent process by not assuming the ELT had time to start at zero. Certainly with more time, some of the language and presentation would have undergone further revision and be rewritten with more carefully nuanced verbiage. We wanted to convey urgency. Nobody puts quiet fire alarms in their homes. When the family is threatened, alarms are meant to be jarring. That's the point. In this case, however, by sounding an alarm with the intent to produce urgency, especially given an already demonstrated hesitancy and lackadaisical attitude by the ELT to Jane Doe's husband, who then escalated his appeal to include Dwayne. Then again to include Wes and Brian as witnesses, the RBT has consistently presented the attempt at legitimate urgency as an attempt at manipulation. Never mind that the house is on fire. Mind you, if we take an average of 15 years investment per AG member, including their time, love, sacrifice, skills, gifts, tears, finances, and commitment to building IHOP-KC, you have a group of senior leaders, all of whom left in good standing, on good terms, though perhaps not without a few bruises, totaling over 150-plus years of life to building the place and serving the vision. Does the newly constituted RBT really think they have the institutional equity to sow doubt onto such staggering commitment, or to relentlessly attempt to paint the AG as misfits with an axe to grind, who apparently want nothing more than to topple a beloved friend and leader and bring to ruin everything they themselves sought so long to build? These people raised their families, labored constantly to raise funds, lived simple lives, struggled to make ends meet, just like everyone else, and forsook more lucrative opportunities elsewhere, just so they could destroy it all? Really? These lifelong partners of the people, the house, and the movement are now diabolically motivated enemies who apparently relish the thought of delivering a heaping dish of injustice to the man they called mentor and friend? Is that really the best spin the think tank has come up with? And if not, why in the world does everyone feel like that's the story you're going with? The point of the document was not to prove a thing, but to start a conversation with the ELT around legitimate concerns that merited further, serious, and deliberate biblical inquiry. It was not a document for public consumption, nor for internal distribution outside of the ELT. The RBT knows this, but has never framed it as the AG's good faith effort to candidly and transparently supply the troubling information we ourselves had been given by grieving, traumatized people looking for justice. We didn't go unguarded or gloves up. We went to brothers, sisters, friends, and coworkers that we knew, had served with, and had mutually sacrificed together to build the thing that Mike Bickle's own actions now threatened. In fact, it is worth repeating, the AG did not seek out this information and then attempt to build a case. 3 cases came to various ones among us from different directions in roughly simultaneous fashion. Having heard, you cannot unhear. What were we supposed to do? The question is not whether God forgives, nor whether Mike Bickle or anyone else involved deserve mercy. As a family, we delight in mercy. Above all, this process has a merciful outcome focused on the restoration of a person's soul. Some of the outsiders, Group 6, are rather ignorantly appealing for mercy as something synonymous to the restoration of a ministry platform, but that skips multiple important biblical steps designed by the Great Shepherd as safety protocols for the sheep. The question is whether a leader who refuses the biblical process they have previously advocated will submit to the rigors of Scripture and scrutiny amidst legitimate claims of wrongdoing, and if innocent, why not? Thereby permitting a path commensurate to their public standing that assures the public either the allegations were false, or if true, that those choices will not be made again. What is what? Part 2, the list. Okay, back to the report. The 2 Jane Does plus 1 suspected Jane Doe were only listed by their initials, with the story of the third being supplied by an aggrieved husband. In each case, they self-identified and granted permission for their stories and their initials to be used. In addition, 5 other possible Jane Does were listed, for one reason only. Each of them, whether directly or by the testimony of others, were associated with the now infamous and highly troubling language of getting in the chariot with Mike and/or Diane will die and we will be together. While shockingly perverse, for the purpose of the report, such language was mainly noted for the uniqueness of the 2 phrases. These are highly non-typical, unusual things to say to a person. For claims of such rare and provocative language to be made by one person is troubling. 2 people, concerning. For 3 to make a similar claim demands action. But for multiple others, beyond the 3 named Jane Does, to have openly or privately discussed Mike's use of similar language with them, and to then share those phrases with others who were then rightly troubled enough to share those disclosures to various members of the AG, indicated possible predatory patterns that could not be ignored. In a small community, for multiple women to claim Mike said those exact words to them, doesn't that strike even those most cynical of these allegations as odd? The timeline showed points where those phrases popped up, spanning decades, clearly admitted as secondhand information, and noted only by numbers, Jane Doe 5, 6, 8, etc. Remember, we already had met 1 Timothy 5's requirement of 2 to 3 credible witnesses. The rest was for the sake of shepherds whom we assumed would be alarmed at this additional potential risk to their flock, especially knowing that concerns had been expressed previously to these same leaders by others, and therefore grateful for the knowledge, especially since the phrases suggested bizarre patterns of a darker, more subversive nature. Shocking, yes. Painful to hear, yes. Necessary to convey, absolutely. Also, if the second-hand reports were true about those icky private phrases, it is highly unlikely these women knew of each other. Those kinds of secrets are whispered to one at a time. A single instance, if true, would require confrontation and correction. But multiple instances with multiple women possibly indicate a deeper, more pathological level of manipulation and predation that should inform, and perhaps negate, any discussion of possible, future restoration. In other words, you can't leave it off the table. It's too important, too weighty. So how do you put it on the table in a responsible, anonymous manner with respect for the women involved and the nature of the claims? Again, how do you convey that kind of ugly in a responsible way that honors every person while unflinchingly conveying the urgency of the problem? Especially if the man involved is already at work behind the scenes with an aggressive intimidation and damage control plan. In light of the primary allegations, not including a unique data point that potentially bound them all together would have been morally negligent because it would have minimized the very tactic Mike was potentially employing in serial fashion, thereby permitting it to continue. Sympathetically, in a fallen world, for those unnamed, possible Jane Does to receive an invitation to get in a great man's prophetic chariot is to no doubt feel chosen and special. On the flip side, when that person is not your spouse, it's wrong. Were a person to suddenly realize there appear to be additional special ones in the chariot with you means we're gonna need a bigger chariot. This would almost certainly invite personal disappointment, even shame, and might be cause for public denials. Since this is pure speculation, let me be clear. My primary point is that the AG has never once publicly stated the identity of those additional 5 suspected Jane Does. For obvious reasons, the AG can neither confirm nor deny the claims certain women have made to self-remove themselves from consideration in this story. In a sense, each story belongs to each woman. They must answer to themselves and to God for the public statements they make. However, like it or not, unfair or not, though their stories are personal, objective truth doesn't belong to any of us. We can all publicly or privately live a lie. The larger question that can be asked involves simple logic. Why did they feel it necessary to identify themselves publicly? If we did not inform them, who did? Who associated them as points on a generic timeline lacking names? And why did they accept that association as worthy of denial when the timeline itself had no inherent ability to implicate them? This should not require so much dissection, but the RBT's ongoing brand management seems more concerned with checking boxes and less concerned with hitting the mark. Its carefully staged wordcraft and counterintelligence drip campaigns seem focused on infusing the entire proceedings with reasonable doubt rather than find the truth, as if this were primarily a legal quandary, rather than a series of profound moral violations. In summary, Consider that the alleged phrases are not at all generic pickup lines. They are detailed, precise, and specific to one man's personal prophetic history. In other words, they can't be mistaken as coming from another source. Nobody else is going to conversationally talk to another woman about his chariot or his wife, Diane, dying. That was the point of their inclusion. Secondly, the document was created and submitted with fear and trembling, as the implications were huge. Mike's integrity was part of his brand, was previously unassailable, and was held in the highest regard by all the AGs right up to the point that we were presented with unavoidably damning evidence to the contrary. Dismissal of any single claim could be understandable. So even with 3 credible allegations spanning multiple decades, we correctly anticipated resistance to the claims and therefore supplied additional, troubling patterns. These were not final verdicts. They were justifiable cause for further investigation. We supplied the information precisely because of what is now transpiring: the attempt to discredit evidence. The irony that potential patterns of evidence are now being used to discredit both the pattern and the more substantiated claims is absurdly confirmational of why a more objective third party has been needed from the beginning. To convey these sticky details in an appropriate way, we created a timeline that mapped out 8 total possible Jane Does, including the 3 primary Janes detailed therein and 5 more, numbered, not named, who were connected only by those troubling, unusual phrases. Our question: does this mean something? Shouldn't this cause alarm? How could such a thing be claimed directly or indirectly about 8 different women, 3 verified, spanning many years in a small community? We made no specific claim about the other 5. Rather, the timeline simply and visually demonstrated that over a wide period of time the chariot and Diane will die language had possibly been used by Mike on multiple other women. Again, let me be clear. No other claims were stated or implied except that for such bizarre grooming language to be employed by any woman, much less multiple women, gave extra weight and credence to the claims of the ones who did choose to name themselves and made similar claims. At no point did any AG members, to my knowledge, have any discussion with the anonymous 5 possible Jane Does, except in one instance where a female AG member reached out to one of the unnamed possible Jane Does out of concern for her well-being, and another instance when that same person initiated a conversation with another AG member to deny being a Jane Doe. At no point did we ever surrender part or all of the 50-page document for their review. In other words, 1. There was no list of names. 2. A timeline listed the repeated use of 2 utterly grievous phrases that wound the heart of any who hear them. 3. The fact that certain women identified as being on any such list, or even the idea of such a list, did not come from the AG. 4. No routine conversations have occurred, much less has any AG member attempted to bully, persuade, or pressure any unnamed, potential Jane Does. I personally have never spoken to anyone outside of the 2 self-identified Jane Does and the husband of the third.